Hello and welcome to the Underscored Podcast. It is Thursday, August 29th. We are almost to a great and extra long weekend for Labor Day, but not yet. First, we have a lot that needs to get discussed. Donald Trump, he is always busy. He's always shaking things up in Washington, for better or for worse. And here to talk about two different things that are going on in the world of DC politics and the president is Natalie Dowzicky of Young Voices. Natalie, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
Natalie, so I woke up this morning and the first thing I saw when I got onto Facebook over my coffee, because I hate myself, is that Donald Trump and his administration are going to be rolling back the opportunity for children born overseas to military service members to automatically be citizens. This was tough to read. Everyone was, hair on fire about it. What is going on here? Is that an accurate summation of what's going on with this new immigration rule?
All right, so there's a few things going on here. I think, well, first of all, we should all know by now that a lot of U.S. immigration law is very complex. It's very complicated. And every time we tack something new onto it, it gets even more so complicated. And I'm actually kind of sorry that this is the first thing you saw over your coffee. I hope it didn't ruin your coffee this morning.
It did.
But let's be clear that the USCIS came out with this statement, I believe it was on yesterday afternoon, that it was changing the policy for those born outside of the U.S. to U.S. service members. Now, we have to be clear here because not all U.S. service members are U.S. citizens. We do have people who immigrated to the United States, whether they naturalized or they're green card holders, who are also service members. So that would be government employees or military members that are serving abroad.
Okay.
So that's one distinction that we need to make clear. And I think the hoopla and probably what you saw on Facebook this morning was that, all children born to U.S. military members, if they were born abroad, they're no longer citizens, or they're no longer going to be guaranteed their birthright citizenship. That is definitely not the case. This new policy put out by the USCIS was in order to align itself with the understanding that the State Department had. And essentially what was happening between these two agencies is that the U.S. service members who were immigrants that were non-citizens had assumed that their children, these being green card holders, had assumed, since they were considered residing in the U.S., and I put that in quotes because that was the understanding, that they were residing in the U.S. by serving the U.S., that their children who they had while serving the U.S. abroad would be then U.S. citizens. The discrepancy here was because people were then applying for passports for their children, and the State Department was denying them. So there was a flaw in the understanding of what is considered residing in the U.S. when it comes to who can become a citizen. Okay, yeah, because Ken
Cuccinelli sort of been on the march. This is the agency's new acting director, I guess. Was he the former governor of Virginia or a candidate for governor? He didn't make it.
I think he was a candidate.
Yeah, he didn't quite make it.
Now he's the acting director.
Yeah, and he was saying that the update does not deny citizenship to children of government and military officials. It just sort of aligns USCIS with the Department of State. And so I guess you're talking about a really small subset of people here who are green card holders currently serving the U.S. military and then find themselves abroad and pregnant. So is that what is going on here? We're talking about a handful of people, or is this, just aimed at female service members, or is it also aimed at male service members who maybe their spouses have actually gone abroad with them?
So I think, this is twofold. It is, like you said, it's a very small tangent of people. And yes, it's going to create significant obstacles for them, considering that green card holders, in order to get their child, if they're born outside of the U.S., in order to have them be a U.S. citizen, would then have to come back and live in the U.S. for 3 to 5 years for their child to apply for naturalization. But I think the big factor here is that we are mainly talking about a green card service member, so an immigrant who now serves in the military and or is a U.S. federal employee.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have to be a military member, and they go abroad, and either they themselves have a child or they have a child with a non-U.S. citizen,
or they adopt,
foreigner.
right?
And yeah, we had to make sure we have all this down. Non-U.S. citizen foreigner, it cannot be assumed that that child is a U.S. citizen. Mind you, that would be a child of a green card holder and a non-U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
So that could be like anyone abroad. And that child would then need to go, instead of having two options, they used to have two options. They used to either be able to go through the naturalization process, which is onerous, or they could have a green card. They could, their parents, mind you, a child's probably not doing the whole process themselves. The child could apply for a green card, which was typically the avenue that was taken. But now they only have one option, which is to go through the whole naturalization process, which I'm going to be honest, I'm not a fan of a lot of the U.S. immigration law we have, because of it's onerous and it's not easy to navigate by yourself. And
yeah, it's complicated. You need to practically look into getting legal assistance to get all the questions answered here. And when you're talking about people who are serving, the United States, I think people just sort of assumed that they would have it easier, right? Like that you would just give them the courtesy of making these things less hard for them to accomplish. And that's what sort of seems out of step here with Donald Trump and sort of his essence and who he is trying to serve as president, that he would do anything to make life harder for service members. So people were kind of looking at this move and going, is Donald Trump, like turning on the military? But I don't really know what this is. Like, why even do this? It's just so small in scale.
So two things here. I don't necessarily think it's out of step. I think it's very in step with how Trump views immigration. We know that Trump favors merit-based immigration rather than family-based immigration. And yes, this only affects a very small tangent of our society. Yeah. But it's very in step with his immigration platform, let's say. And the other thing is, I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Oh, just like, why do this exactly? It is such just like working around the margins of policy. And it's, I think in your imagination, you imagine like Trump up at a weird hour of the night and he's like, gosh, how can I, make immigration just a little bit more in line with my views? Like, oh, this is an easy thing that I can get done. But maybe he doesn't even have anything to do with this, like, is it just an administrative thing that they're clearing up discrepancies? I don't understand the why here.
Yeah. So in terms of, I don't necessarily think this was keeping Trump up at night. And I don't think this is like, he was like, oh, I have no other options. We just got to inflame the media today. So here's what we're going to go with. I do think from a practical standpoint that it was a decision between agencies for the most part to have an agreement on what we considered residency and who we were going to automatically give citizenship to those who are not U.S. citizens. I largely think it's going to clear up some paperwork discrepancies, and which is why I think the media outburst was a little bit premature. Let's say we didn't carefully read. I'll also say that the USCIS didn't carefully explain thoroughly until they came out later this morning and again this afternoon, clarifying who this does and does not affect. But I do think the media kind of took a jump on it.
It sounded right.
Like, oh my gosh, we're eroding birthright citizenship.
I think, for how they view the Trump administration. And that was sort of my impression as well when I read this morning. I was like, okay, well, that sounds about right. And that is total BS. And I disagree with that. But then throughout the day, immigration reporters and professionals have been coming out and going, this is actually way more complicated than we all thought it was 12 hours ago. So, I really appreciate you shedding a little bit of light on this, because it has been bewildering me and a lot of my own personal friends. So thank you for that. What would you say is like the lesson here, maybe, that you have learned just looking into all of this and seeing sort of the past 24 hours of news cycle about this?
I think, there's two lessons. I think at first you need to you need to listen, one, to the officials that are the ones coming out with these policy changes, because if they're saying flat out, like the acting director said today, how this will not affect U.S. citizen service members who have children abroad when they are serving our countries on limited time deployments. So I think you can take that with a lot of merit. I think some of the other news cycles that are trying to spin this immigration debate, obviously against Trump, he's been, the news on immigration for him has been like what's put him in the spotlight, essentially. So anything on immigration is going to pick up a lot of steam. And I think you need to be very careful when you're watching the news or reading articles that are second or third hand, that you need to kind of look at it with some skepticism.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so in another thing that the president has been doing that I think you could say, gosh, I don't know if it is unexpected or completely in character. I'm really curious what you think. So Donald Trump called into Fox News Radio this morning to talk about a variety of issues, but one of them was Afghanistan and the looming September 1st kind of faux deadline for whether or not we are going to withdraw our troops or we're going to continue working in the region with our allies there. And he said that the U.S. is going to withdraw, but there will always be at least 8,600 troops in the country for the time being. This sort of comes after Lindsey Graham of South Carolina has been pushing him relentlessly to stay the course in Afghanistan, while I think people like myself, yourself, a lot of Young Voices writers have been trying to beat the drum and remind him that he made a promise to his voters that this was going to end on his watch. And like presidents before him, I guess Obama, it is not going to. What do you think about this? Is this in character or out of character?
I mean, I think it's completely in character. I can understand why some voters would be surprised, right? He got up at his State of the Union, over a year ago now, and said, oh, it's time, great countries don't fight endless wars, right? And everyone saw that as a rallying cry, and we believed him. And I put that in quotes, we believed him. I think it's easy for a president or anyone in power, for that matter, to say, you know what, our troops have been at war too long. It's time to take them out. And it's easy to, like I said, beat that drum and cry that cry. But I think he is getting a lot of pushback from his own cabinet members. And Lindsey Graham, that man is unhinged when it comes to Afghanistan. And I think it's sad. I don't consider when we're saying withdrawal, but we're still leaving 8,600 troops there. That's
him
not
trying to say that he's building
right?
The wall when in fact he's only put up like a panel.
Right. Exactly. Like, okay, yeah. So he can say, I brought this many troops out, and he can say, well, Obama put this many in. Like, it doesn't matter. It's not over, right? There's still people there. You can't say your number is down to zero. And when it comes to Afghanistan, like we've seen the last few years, there are plenty of candidates and there are plenty of presidents that will do this sort of rally cry to say, because everyone supports getting out of Afghanistan at this point, right? It's a pretty widely supported in terms of when you poll voters on this issue, and everyone loves to say like support our troops and bring our troops home. But I don't think President Trump necessarily thought about what that would mean and how he would go about doing that. Though I do think the peace talks, mind you, I don't know exactly what they're talking about, but I do think those seem to be going well. But then again, like we can't really judge that. And I don't think, even if those peace talks go stellar, I don't think that means our troops are out of Afghanistan.
It is really impossible to follow Trump on this issue. It seems like when you go into the swamp, you go into Washington, that is when all of a sudden you become pragmatic about the issues surrounding the Middle East. And then they always end up just opting to keep troops in there. And it's very disappointing, because I think if there was one thing out of a Trump presidency I was legitimately hopeful from, it was a pull our troops all the way out and return them home, end the missions abroad. But it is just not looking like it is going to happen.
Yeah. And honestly, and I completely agree with you on that. And it was apparent to me, I guess, in the last set of Democratic debates, it took us, and mind you, when I'm watching them, I have to, silence a lot of my thoughts, or I might go absolutely insane. But I think it took an hour and 56 minutes for Tulsi to be the one that brought up Afghanistan. And to me, that's signaling that the debaters in general didn't think that was necessarily a topic that the American public cared about, right? We talked about healthcare for like hours on end. And I think in order for it to be a serious topic, and a topic that the American public more adamantly cares about, I think someone needs to like put a stake in the ground that this is enough. And I don't think certainly none of the candidates on the Democratic side have. And Trump, to me, also is like, this is definitely an area where he's fallen short. And I mean, the fact is that if we're not even willing to debate or talk about ending the war at that point, then let's just pretend, that's happening, but we're just not going to talk about it. That's not how you go about doing, especially not how about doing foreign policy. And I think Trump's got himself in a bit of an interesting spot here, because a lot of his voters were pretty enthused about him saying that. And even like someone who isn't necessarily a supporter of Trump, I was pretty glad that he seemed to be on our side, so to speak, on this issue.
When it comes to foreign policy, there was a moment where I think it was acceptable to think that. Natalie Dowzicky, thanks for coming on Underscored today. Natalie is a coordinator over at libertarianism.org and a contributor to Young Voices. You can follow her on Twitter at Nat_Dowzicky. We hope you'll do that. You can find a link to that in the show notes. We'll be back next week after Labor Day with more from Underscored. Until then, stay free.